Dr. Wood. Why was Dr. Ray giving you a hard time at the door?
What's that?
Why was he giving you a hard time at the door?
Not too long.
So you adjusted him, actually. Is that right?
Rick, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what, that was after his first car crash?
Yeah, I lost track of how many accidents he
He did have a lot. He was like, whoa, talking about rebuild this time and that time. Well, you know what? Let's just get to it. I'd like to start with a self-introduction.
Okay.
So I'll give you an example, my version, and then you can go after. So to start with, my name is. So my name is Kenji. I'm 35. I'm a filmmaker. I've been doing it for 14 years. I'm here in Wisconsin to do a documentary on Gonstead, chiropractic, the system, the people, the doctors, the fans, and that's why I'm here. So then we'll ask you for yours.
All right. Well, I'm Dr. Herb Wood. 71 years old, and I had the good fortune to have my first chiropractic seminar with Dr. Gonstead when I was only in school for a month. So that was back in November of 1971. And so from that seminar, I just really fell in love with the Gonstead work and decided that that was what I was going to do. And so from that point on, I just did everything I could, Gonstead, to learn as much as I could about it. And I had field doctors that came along the way and helped me out. And my field doctor in Montana, who is the guy who invited me to that first seminar. So he paid for my motel room down here in the Caracol and bought my meals for me, paid for my seminar, and I learned how to analyze x-rays by the end of that weekend.
So today in 2021, we hear that story that after a month of getting started, you had, we call it the privilege, honor, you were lucky to, after a month in, go to a clinic with Dr. Gonstead. Today we say that retrospectively, but at that time, what was your idea of going into that clinic? Like, what was your first impression of him, and what was that climate, the environment like behind chiropractic that made you even get there in the first place? Let's just go through that part.
Yeah. Well, I really didn't understand what chiropractic was when I started at Palmer College. We had a philosophy course that we had in that first quarter that helped us to kind of get the basic understanding of it. But when I was invited up to that first seminar and listened to Dr. Gonstead speak to everybody that first morning, because he always had at least a half hour on Friday mornings when he'd start the seminar, where he'd come down the back stairs and he'd walk out that door, and we're 250, 300 chiropractors and students were in the room, and all of a sudden the room would just quiet down, And I looked up and saw him there as he came out that door, and I thought, here's this guy who's probably no more than 5 foot 8 inches tall, walks with a severe limp, and yet he commands the honor and respect of all these people in this room. And so that was my first impression of Dr. Gonstead. And then went on that weekend to learn how to analyze a set of x-rays. And I thought, wow, 1 month in school and I know how to analyze an x-ray and find the problem on a patient. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to compare everything else to this scientific application and see how the others match up. And so none of them did. So that's why I became a Gonstead doctor.
Let's go into that part of, like, none of them did. What did you find?
There was nothing that I felt was really scientific that wasn't real subjective in the other techniques. There was no consistent way of every chiropractor finding the same thing like there was on the x-ray. If everybody was trained to draw the lines on a film the way they're supposed to, then everybody will come up with the same answer. It's not so in the other techniques because they lend so much of their technique to motion palpation or tonal experiences, and you just don't have the objective findings in those types of technique as you do with the Gonstead method. It's very scientific, yet it's full of the art and the philosophy of chiropractic. To me, Gonstead is chiropractic.
So there's no other chiropractic.
There's other types of chiropractic techniques, but as far as the type of chiropractic that I want to practice, there's nothing else but Gonstead. I've never in-depth studied any of the other techniques, although I spent time during that first year looking at other techniques and attending clubs and going to a few of the seminars that the doctors sponsoring that technique would put on, but I just didn't find the scientific application to be consistent throughout, from one doctor to the next.
So you, as I understand too, I mean, we've interviewed 12, 13 people already, doctors, I should say, but I know that it's the scientific method behind this practice. It's the system behind it. And exactly like you said, it's the fact that each doctor will find, or you guys have this communication of like, I can tell you this, and all 10 of you, every one of you will know exactly where to go for the adjustment.
Right.
So there's this kind of objectiveness to it,
Right.
which made you decide to do what you've been doing, right?
That's right.
But there's also the fact that we're human, and we're all biased. Maybe some of us grew up speaking different languages in different countries with different approaches to health and wellness. So there's a degree of subjectivity in every human being. So how do you personally balance this going in between, like, okay, I am who I am, that's my subjective bias or whatever, and also just this objective truth, science, numbers, and methods. So how do you go in between those two?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
It's kind of a heavy one, but it's just to say there's an amount of what you do that is just you, Dr. Herb Wood, right? And is that, like how you said when you described seeing Dr. Gonstead for the first time, he's coming with this limp, right, 5'8" guy, but there's other people who are like 5'1", or 6'3". There's a lot of variation in the amount of in the doctors who do this, and so for all these different doctors with different sized hands and different amounts of time and different patients, different experience behind them, they all differ that way. How do then they all have this same foundation?
Okay. Well, I think you just said the words "the same foundation." I think that foundation comes from an understanding of Gonstead's philosophy that he tried to teach us as far as being specific about what we were doing. And so then he would get into the discussion of what's specific, or he'd say Pacific. And so we learned over time that being specific meant that we had to adjust a patient in a certain direction in order to return that bone to the position that it should be in. And anything other than that would not correct the entire subluxation. And so that kind of forms the basis of our understanding of what he talked about, the foundation of what we learned from him. And so you add to that his 5-point analysis, which was our motion and static palpation and visualization. Those three fit together pretty closely because they help to give us the direction of the misalignment of the vertebra. And so we look to those three things, but really the motion palpation, he said, even in the chapters, he said that motion palpation is a backup to the instrument. So the instrument is what he used to find the subluxation. He used motion visualization static palpation to help him further define how the bone was misaligned. And then he would look at the x-ray and confirm or deny what he had found in the patient. If they didn't agree, then he'd go back and do it all over again. He might send the patient back to have him re-x-rayed because what he found on the motion, static, and visualization didn't match with what he was seeing on the x-ray.
Someone else said that he did the motion and static palpation before doing the x-ray. And so would you say, like, I guess the question is, how do you build that kind of sensitivity? How do you build that I don't know, magical, know-it-all type of ability to know before you confirm?
Well, another part of that evaluation really goes back to our consultation. When we first are introduced to our new patient, we have 2 or 3 minutes there to do a consultation where we should, by the end of that 3 minutes, have a fairly good idea in our mind of what the potential problem is and where it's located in the spine. So in other words, if we had somebody with a Bell's palsy, Doc always said that if it's on the left side of the face, not only would it be the atlas, it would be an ASLP atlas. If it was on the right side of the face, it would be an ASRP atlas. Now, once in a while, there'd be a TMJ problem that would cause a Bell's palsy, but as far as the spine goes, it was one or the other for which side of the face it was on. And so he did a multitude of what we now call symptom vertebra correlations, where we know with a pretty high accuracy, pretty high percentage, and I say 85 to 95% of the time they're accurate, that we know from our discussion with the patient, if we ask the right questions during the consultation, we know at the end of that consultation a range of vertebra that may be involved with that patient's particular condition. Just because of the multitude of clinical experiences that he had with nearly 4 million patient visits over the course of his career. That's a lot of patients, a lot of patient visits. And so, and he had an analytical mind that he could draw these conclusions over time of how people responded to the adjustments in these different areas. And so he had narrowed it down to certain vertebra for certain problems. And so I always caution my students that take my seminars to be careful that when you draw those conclusions, that your mind is still open to the possibility that it's entirely someplace else than what you think. So that's the second phrase in Dr. Gonstead's famous quote, find it, and second, accept it where you find it. And so a lot of times that's hard for us as chiropractors because we think that because we have all these symptom vertebral correlations that everybody's going to have an atlas subluxation that has a Bell's palsy, and that's just not true. So we have to be open-minded, but it's a building of, it's not any one of these things, the motion or the static or the viz or the x-ray or the instrument or the case history. It's the joining of all of those things together that give us a foundation of understanding of what that patient's problem is in a very short period of time. And so having all of these different things pointing to the same bone that we know by the time we get to the end of our evaluation that's the bone. There's no question anymore. That's the bone. That's the way it's out of alignment. That's the nervous system that's involved. And now I just have to decide which bone needs to be adjusted.
Personal question just for me. How do you memorize? It's a question about memory. With all this examples, seminars, memories, how do you go back into this library to access what you need?
Well, Dr. Gonstead said that it took 8 or 9 of his seminars for you to attend, 8 or 9 seminars, just to start to get the basic understanding of his work. So none of us at the end of 8 or 9 seminars had it down pat, but we had heard things over and over and over and over again. And of course we'd studied and read our notes after the seminars, between seminars, of these different symptom vertebra correlations and things about on the x-ray that he'd point out on x-ray, how to find subluxations on the x-ray, things about motion palpation that he would go through, the technique, when we'd have technique sessions with him, things that he would say there. So it's just a compilation of all of those things happening so many times. It makes me think of I have a patient that he says, Doc, he says, I love to ask you questions. I said, well, why? And he said, because I can see you pulling out your file cabinet and going through the folder to find the answer to the question that I just asked you, and pull that folder out, open up the page that has that answer on it, and respond to what he's asked. Now that of course takes 10 seconds to happen or less, but I thought that was pretty interesting, because that's exactly what I felt that I do when questions are asked of me in that regard.
So how can you encourage, let's say, a doctor who's in year 1? How can you encourage that doctor who's like, I don't have Dr. Wood's kind of file cabinet? Like, what do you say to that doctor?
Well, now you've got digital. We didn't have anything digital when I was growing up in chiropractic, so the answer is just to get exposed to it as much as you can. There's no way at all that you're going to pick all this up in a year or 2 years or 3 years or 5 years. It just doesn't happen. I was watching a video the other day of Dr. Gonstead, and I thought, I've been doing that wrong for 45 years. And I thought, gosh, how many more patients would have gotten better if I had done it that way instead of the way I had been doing it? And so we just have to always be open to learning more, and never take the offensive when someone tries to help us improve what we're doing. Be open to listening at least, and trying something that might be different from what we understand or what we do, but always be open to it at least before you close it out again.
What would you say is your specialty, if you even consider it, if you were to have one? Let's just assume you have a specialty. What would that be?
Gosh, I guess the technique aspect of the Gonstead work, I've worked pretty hard to get that as close to what I think Dr. Gonstead taught us as possible. I'm pretty well known around the seminars for my pelvic work technique. But I think I'm just as good at the cervical chair, or the knee chest, or high-low. We just have to learn how to apply what we know we have to do to adjust a lumbar or a pelvis on the bench with a push move. We have to know how to let that kind of slide over when we do the same thing for a pull move. And when we adjust a cervical in the cervical chair, we have to be able to do that same thing in a prone position or on the knee chest. So we have to understand a lot about the anatomy of the joint that we're working with in order to be able to do that.
I say this because I know you're a Green Bay fan. I was here yesterday. Right?
Yes, Packers.
So, as you know, there's 11 positions, right? So you could be fast. You can run a 4-4. You can run a 4-4. You can have a 40-inch vertical. You could have great eyesight, timing, all of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But still, you have a preference. You might not be a wide receiver. Or you might play better. Let's say as a tight end. You might, or you know what? Maybe you're a better punt receiver. You know what I mean? So you can have the same person, the same athlete. Sometimes you play 2-3 positions on defense side and offense side,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's why I'm asking, like, your specialty in this. If we say chiropractic, Gonstead got chiropractic is a sport, and there's positions. We know it's got a wide girth of possibilities. The human body, right? There's so much possibilities, and do you kind of lean towards one position, if you will? Like you said the pelvic or something. Is that natural for someone doing it, as long as you've been doing it, to like kind of gravitate towards a certain position, for lack of a better word, a certain part of the body?
Yeah. Gosh. Well, all I could say really, Kenji, is that I think probably most people associate me more with the pelvic bench adjusting. But when they take my cervical bench seminar, and they understand that, I have a pretty good feeling for that as well. So I'd like to be able to pinpoint that to one thing, but I don't know that I really can.
I was thinking Taysom Hill,
What's
like,
that?
Saints, he's a quarterback tight end, and like
Yeah.
all of a sudden, I think he even played some other position that it's like there's these people who you lean towards one thing. Maybe there's an argument that you should do one position and be really good at it,
Mm-hmm.
and there's another one where it's like you should actually play around and like figure it out that way. So I just thought I'd throw it out there, maybe. Maybe one of these doctors has a question they want to ask.
Yeah, so you've spent a lot of your career teaching. You did a lot of your seminars. You're a frequenter of seminars. It probably would have been a lot easier for you to stay in one location and practice. You probably could have made a lot more money doing that. Why did you prioritize teaching this technique? Why did you take time to what made you want to continue this legacy?
I get a little emotional about it because the reason I do it is because I made a graveside promise to Dr. Gonstead the day we buried him, that I would do everything that I could to further his technique. And so that's why I've taught ever since I graduated from Palmer. I started teaching and doubled up on that after Dr. Gonstead died. It's just a deep desire within me to try to teach the work as I felt Dr. Gonstead taught me. And I always volunteered to be his patient at the seminars, and so I always felt what it felt like when he was in an adjusting position and then made the adjustment. And so I learned a tremendous amount from that show and tell type thing, where he did, completely evaluated me with a scope and motion, static, viz, X-ray, and then adjusted me. And so I just learned a lot about all aspects of the technique as a result of that. And it's because of all that he put into me that I wanted to put as much into as many other people as I could and help them learn as much as I could teach them about the Gonstead work.
Could you describe that day that you buried him?
Well, you want me to cry on film here or what? Well, we had all gathered around his coffin there at the graveside, and it was raining, and we, of course, said the words and stuff with this pastor there, and then most everybody filtered away from the graveside, and I stayed on there by myself. And just had a final talk with him. Excuse me. But that's where I promised him that I would do all that I could to further his work. And so that's where I come from.
I'm not here to try to make you cry. It's just I understand he's buried here, and we have plans to visit. So, I know there's something written on the tombstone, or I don't know what it's like. That's why I'm asking you. What's written on his? Is it a plaque or a tombstone?
It's tombstone. I don't really recall what was printed on it. All I remember is his name and his wife's name, Elvira.
And as you made that promise to him to carry it on, which you're doing very well, and we hope that this video is part of that. It's carrying on that message this way.
Right. Absolutely.
Right. So, take this opportunity to kind of fulfill another piece of that promise, and I say talk as if you're talking to me as someone who is considering. And in fact, you're going to look into this lens, and you're going to talk first person to everyone out there, and this is you just fulfilling your promise to Dr. Gonstead.
So you want me to?
You can talk directly into this as to the public, to people who are interested about chiropractic care, or actually started, maybe they're at school, or at life, whatever.
Okay.
Speak to them and fulfill part of that promise.
Okay. Well, to me, chiropractic includes not only the science of chiropractic, which all the schools are emphasizing so much these days, but it also includes the philosophy and the art of chiropractic. And so by applying the art of chiropractic, it allows the philosophy to come through, in that we find the body will respond to the adjustment and help the patients heal by correcting the vertebrae that are misaligned and allowing the nervous system to function as it should. And so if you want to be a chiropractor, whenever I refer somebody to chiropractic college, I tell them to go to Palmer, Davenport, because if you want to be a specific doctor, adjusting people in a specific way, having a scientific application of the work, then you're going to find that at Davenport, because there's so many opportunities to study the Gonstead work. We have, of course, the college teaches the basics of the Gonstead technique. We have a Troxel intern program that's taught at Dr. Lawler's office in Parkview, where you can attend Sunday afternoon classes and learn about the Gonstead work. There are workshops where doctors from all over the Midwest here come down at least once a month and teach a weekend seminar. And then, of course, the GMI seminars, and I teach my seminars here as well, so that you can completely get immersed in the Gonstead system and learn what it is to be a very specific Gonstead doctor, understanding all the concepts that he taught us about motion and static and visualization, and about x-ray, and about instrumentation. And so all these things come together to help us to become a very specific chiropractor. And to do less than that, to do fewer things than what we know we need to do, is being indifferent toward your patient. So how would you like to go to a doctor who says, that's good enough? Is it? Do you really feel that it's good enough is the best you can do? No, it's not. So when I refer students to chiropractic, I refer them because I know that the Gonstead method is going to provide them with a specific means of adjusting and that will help the patient the most. So when I talk to a lay person, I try to keep it very simple. I say the Gonstead work is a very specific form of chiropractic. We use an instrument to help us find the problem. We use what we call motion and static palpation, where we move the patient back and forth to feel the bones moving. And we use X-ray that helps us to conclude what our decisions are about how to fix the bone. And so all these things work together to help us realign your spine to relieve any pinching against the nerve. And so patients will respond better, quicker, with fewer treatments to the spine by being specific about how we apply the X-ray and the motion and so forth.
I got one.
Go for it. So this one you'll respond this way.
Okay.
Go for it.
So I've got to sit on a few of these, and I just like there's such a cool just like ribbon that runs through every single one of these, and it's just like there's a tone not only here in like some of the different groups, but there's a tone in Gonstead that is just like, hey, I'm gonna pass along this information, and I don't want to do it. I don't want to gain from it. Like I truly want to give, and I'm really curious where that comes from, and I want to know if I've thought of few different things in my head. Was it something that like Gonstead really set the tone, and because he was so giving and did these long hours and taught these seminars and did all these things, like was he the leader in that, or does it come from the fact that our profession is so life-giving just from a day of seeing patients and watching results, or like where do you think that comes from?
Well, I think you touched on the reasons with your question. I think Gonstead did set the tone. He was a very, very humble person. He was quiet. He was not flamboyant in any way. He was very down to earth. If you asked him a question, he would take as long as it took to answer your question, and as many questions as you had. I actually felt sorry for him. We'd go over down here to the care call and on our lunch break, and the next thing, a doctor or a student would stop by his table and ask him a question, and he'd stop eating and listen and then answer the question. And I don't think he ever finished a lunch down there during a seminar time. But yeah, I mean, I think he started the process that so many of us, as you mentioned, have followed over the years to pass the information along. And so as we got into practice and started taking care of so many patients, we had the same experiences that Gonstead had, not to his degree or volume, but certainly understood what Dr. Gonstead was experiencing when he helped so many patients. And so that kind of a experience that we have to see people respond so dramatically to chiropractic care for a variety of different things, whether they're visceral or musculoskeletal. And those are just things that you want to pass on and help other people to experience the same thing, and in some way influence doctors into the future and the numbers of patients that they're going to help. I used to, during my seminars, I used to say, Now, everybody that takes one of my seminars, when you get in practice, you have to send me a penny for every adjustment that you give. And I said, that's going to be my retirement. And so over the years, there's been literally thousands of students that I've taught and doctors. None of them have sent me my penny. But that was my way of saying, I'm here. I want to teach. I want to help as many people as I can learn what I know about the Gonstead work and pass it on so that it continues into the future, so that there is no end to it. I fear that the science of chiropractic that's overwhelming our chiropractic colleges, maybe I shouldn't even say the science of chiropractic because it's more the science of medical theory, has overtaken our colleges so much that there's very little chiropractic art and philosophy that's taught anymore. And so there's very little that the students understand about X-ray analysis and instrumentation. Some of the schools don't even allow the students to use it in in the clinic. So that's heartbreaking to me because it's a primary tool in what we do as Gonstead doctors that helps us focus in on where the problem is at. And so it's important that we continue to provide the information that we all know in our seminars and our contacts with students and other doctors to continue to promote the work and make sure that it has a long future ahead of it.
Slow clap.
Yep.
I mean,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
That's great.
Thanks, Doc.
Yeah,
Thank
you
you
bet.
so much.
Thanks for letting us pick
Yep.
your brain.